Welcome to the final between Magnus Carlsen, the world champion, versus Grandmaster Hikaru Nakamura. The final has come to Armageddon. In this final game, this Armageddon, if Hikaru wins this Armageddon, he's the winner of the final. If Magnus Carlsen wins, or even if Magnus Carlsen manages to have a draw, Magnus Carlsen will win this final. Hikaru will play with white pieces and he have 5 minutes. Magnus Carlsen plays black pieces and only have 4 minutes. Hikaru Nakamura starts with pawn to e4 and Magnus Carlsen plays pawn to e5. White knight to f3. And already here in the second move for Magnus Carlsen, this level of excitement and thrill increases because Magnus Carlsen, for some reason, is using surprisingly long time before he makes his move. So we are not sure if this was because of an interruption in the internet connection. However, after a few more seconds thinking, Magnus Carlsen moves his knight to c6, white bishop to b5, and the black knight to f6, settling the pawn on e4, and the white pawn to d3 to protect his pawn, black bishop to c5. White bishop captures the knight on c6, and he is captured by the pawn. White knight to d2. Hikaru often prefers to move his knight to d2, f1, and then later to g3. Black bishop to e6, and the white pawn to h3. Black knight to d7 to protect his pawn on e5. White knight to f1 and the black pawn to f6. Here white makes a surprising move by moving the pawn to g4. So this makes it possible that white will not castle on the king side. Black queen to e7 and the white knight to g3. Black castles on the queen side and the white queen to e2. Black king to e8 and the white pawn to a3. Black bishop to b6, the white bishop to e3, offering a trade with the black bishop. Here a surprising move from black, that he moved his knight to f8. I would believe that he would keep his knight on e7 in case the black bishop captures the black bishop. White castle on the queen side and the black knight to e6. White knight to h5 and the black bishop captures the white bishop on e3 and he is captured by the queen. Black pawn to c5 and the white knight to d2. Maybe white is preparing to move his knight to b3 and capture the pawn on c5 together with the queen. To protect the pawn further, black pawn to b6. So instead, the white knight moves to b1 and the black knight to h4. White castle to g1 to make sure that the black knight cannot move to g2. Black pawn to d5 to protect his knight and the white knight to c3. Black knight to e6 and the white king to b1. Black knight to f4, offering a trade with the white knight. White knight captured the black knight and he is captured by the pawn. White queen to e2 and black pawn to h5. Offering a trade with the pawn on d4. Instead, white pawn to f3 and the black pawn captured the white pawn on d4 and is captured with the white pawn. Black rook to h3, making it possible for the other black rook to move to h8 and work together with the two rooks. White rook to g2 and the black rook to h8. White rook to g1, the black rook to h1, offering a trade with the white rook. Instead, white moves his pawn to b3 and the black pawn to c4. Is captured by the white pawn, and this makes it possible for the black queen to move to a3. White pawn to g5. Here I would prefer to move the queen to f1, for example, to protect the rook. Black pawn capture the white pawn and is captured by the white rook on g5. Black pawn to a5 and the white queen to d3. Black king to b7 and the white rook to g7. The black rook captured the white rook on g1 and is captured by the white rook. Black rook to h7 and the white knight to a4. Black queen to d6. Here Magnus Carlsen wants to trade the queens to make it easier to manage to get a draw. So Hikaru wants to avoid to have a draw, of course, because if he have a draw he will lose this game. So he moved the queen to c3. Black bishop to d7 and the white knight to b2. Black rook to h3 and the white rook moves to d1 and threatens the black queen. The black queen moves to e7. White knight to d3. Very surprising move because this makes it possible for the black rook to capture the pawn on f3. Instead, white captured the pawn on e5, offering a trade with the black queen. Here black makes a very surprising move. Instead of capturing the queen, he captured the knight on d3. meaning that the white queen can capture the black queen on e7 and black rook capture the rook on d1. So black is trading a rook and a knight versus a queen. White king to b2 and the black bishop to c6. White pawn to e5 and the black pawn to f3. So here is a race between the two pawns. White want to bring his pawn to trade to become a queen, and the same with the black pawn. White queen to f6 and the black rook to d2 to protect the next step for his pawn. White pawn to e6 and the black pawn to f2. White pawn to e7 and the black rook to e2 to protect his pawn on e7. White queen to f7 and the black rook captures the pawn on e7 and instead the queen captures the pawn on f2. Black rook to g7 and the white queen to f4. Already in this situation you can see that it's very hard or almost impossible for white to win this game. Black has a very good defense with the three pawns, the bishop and the rook. Black rook to g2 and the white queen to e5. Black rook to d6 and white pawn to c3. Black rook to g2 and checks the king and the king moves to c1. Black rook to g4 and the white queen to e6. The black rook to e4 threatening the queen and the queen moves to f7. Black rook checks the king again by moving to e1 and the king moves to d2. Rook to e4. Also here a surprising move that the white pawn moves to d4 instead of moving the king also to d3. The pawn is black pawn capture the pawn on b4 and he is captured by the pawn. Black pawn to b5. The white pawn capture black pawn and is captured by the bishop. White queen to d5 threatening the black rook. So the bishop moves to c6. White queen to c5 and the black rook to e6. White king to c3 and the black rook to d6. White pawn to e5 and the black bishop to d7. White queen to e5. And as you can see here, white cannot do anything to win this game. Black always manage to keep this as a draw. Black moves the bishop to c8 and the white king to c4. The black rook to b6, making it impossible for white to continue with the pawn. White king to c5 and the black king to d8. White queen to e8, the black rook to d6. White queen to f8 and the black rook back to b6. And in this situation, the two players agree upon a draw. Hikaru Nakamura realizes that he has no chance to win this game. He can only manage to get a draw. And with this draw, Magnus Carlsen wins this whole series in the final versus Hikaru Nakamura. If you want to watch more games between world champion Magnus Carlsen and grandmasters such as Hikaru Nakamura, you are heartily welcome to subscribe to our channel. Welcome.